He stood near the edge of Hangar 7, wearing the plain gray uniform of a low-rank recruit. The fabric looked worn, as if it had been issued many times before. His boots were scratched. His armor plates lacked the polished shine seen on elite soldiers. He was not tall, not heavily built, and not decorated with symbols of honor. To Salith, he looked unimportant. The Coalition flagship Radiant Accord vibrated softly as it moved through controlled space. Crew members hurried across metal walkways. Engineers shouted status reports. Drones floated between open panels, repairing damage from earlier skirmishes. Beyond the thick observation windows, stars shimmered like cold fire. The apex predators were close. Everyone aboard the ship felt it. A quiet tension filled the air, heavy and sharp, like the moment before a storm breaks. Even species that had never known fear sensed danger in their instincts. The apex were not simply enemies, they were legends of destruction, ancient hunters that ruled entire sectors of space. Civilizations spoke their name only in warnings and final prayers. When apex fleets appeared, resistance usually ended in extinction. Yet here the coalition stood, refusing to kneel. Princess Salith was present as a symbol of unity. She was the third daughter of the Valari Queen. Sent to observe and learn, her people were tall, elegant, and long-lived. Known for strategic brilliance rather than brute force, Salith herself had studied war theory since childhood, but theory did not prepare one for standing this close to annihilation. She moved through the hangar with her honor guard close behind. Her silver-blue skin reflected the overhead lights. The thin crest along her shoulders marked her royal blood. Officers paused to bow as she passed. No one bowed to the human recruit. Salith barely noticed him until she felt his eyes on her. She turned her head slightly. For a brief moment, their gazes met. There was no fear in his expression. No awe. No hunger for favor. His face was calm, focused, as if her presence changed nothing at all. He gave a small nod, polite, restrained, and then looked back down at a device wrapped around his wrist. Salith frowned faintly. A recruit should have looked away. She continued onward, pushing the thought aside. Humans were strange, informal creatures. That was nothing new. What puzzled her was why Coalition Command relied on them so heavily. They were physically weaker than many species, shorter-lived, and lacked natural armor or claws. And yet, humans were everywhere, especially on the outer defense lines. Inside the tactical chamber, a large holo display showed the battlefield. Blue icons marked coalition ships. Red symbols bloomed across the edge of the projection. The Apex fleet had arrived. The room fell silent. The Apex ships were massive, organic structures shaped like curved blades and teeth. Their surfaces pulsed faintly, alive in ways technology could not copy. They moved with slow confidence, like predators who already believed the hunt was over. "Range confirmed," an officer said quietly. Admiral Corrin, a veteran of 3 galactic wars, folded his arms. "They've brought more vessels than expected." "They always do," another commander replied. Salith studied the display carefully. The apex formation was shifting small, almost unnoticeable changes in position. It reminded her of hunting beasts circling prey, waiting for the moment to strike. "They are testing our reactions," she said. "They want us to reveal our weak points." Admiral Corrin nodded. "Agreed." A junior sensor officer suddenly stiffened. "Sir." Multiple Apex scout packs breaking from the main formation. "Targets?" Corrin asked. The officer swallowed. "They're heading toward our flanks. Secondary corridors. Hangar zones." Salith's eyes narrowed slightly. That was where many human units had been stationed. A familiar pattern. The Apex always attacked where they believed resistance would be weakest. The oldest predators in the galaxy still relied on the same logic. The alarm changed tone. "All units to combat readiness," Corrin ordered. "Brace for contact." The ship trembled as shields strengthened and weapons powered up. Salith was escorted to a reinforced observation corridor overlooking the flank hangars. As they moved, explosions echoed through the hull. The Apex scouts arrived in waves, biological pods slamming into the ship, melting through layers of armor with acidic force. The corridor filled with noise. Energy weapons fired. Smoke spread through the air. Coalition troops engaged the enemy as alarms screamed warnings of hull breaches. Through the thick viewport, Salith watched the battle unfold. The Apex were terrifying up close. Multi-limbed bodies moved with unnatural speed. Their living armor absorbed energy, fire, adapting with every hit. Coalition soldiers were forced back step by step. Then the humans moved. They did not rush forward, screaming. They did not scatter. They formed lines. Human squads repositioned with practiced ease, drawing the Apex into narrow corridors and kill zones. Devices activated localized gravity shifts that slowed enemy leaps, sound pulses that disrupted coordination. Kinetic rounds aimed not at center mass but at joints and sensory clusters. Salith leaned closer to the glass. At the center of one human unit was the recruit in gray. He no longer looked unimportant. His movements were controlled, precise. He gave short, clear commands that cut through the chaos. When an apex burst from the ceiling above him, he rolled aside and fired once. The creature collapsed. Its armor split cleanly. That was not the action of an inexperienced soldier. More apex poured in. The pressure increased. Even the humans were forced to give ground. For a moment, Salith thought the flank might fall. Then something unexpected happened. The apex hesitated. Several of the creatures stopped advancing. Their sensory limbs twitched. Low, vibrating signals passed between them, communication beyond language. "They're slowing down," an officer whispered. "Why are they slowing down?" On the tactical display, red icons flickered. Then, almost impossibly, the apex began to pull back. Not a wild retreat. Not panic. A controlled withdrawal. They covered one another as they retreated through the breaches, sealing biological pods behind them. Within minutes, the corridor was quiet, except for the crackle of damaged systems and the distant echo of alarms. Salith stared in disbelief. The apex predators did not withdraw. Not from scouts, not from secondary targets, not ever. Her gaze locked onto the human recruit. He stood amid smoke and debris, breathing evenly. His uniform was torn now, darkened by battle stains. Around him, other humans checked each other for injuries, already preparing defenses for the next wave. He sensed her attention and looked up. This time, he offered a small, tired smile. It was not proud. It was not boastful. It was the expression of someone who had expected this outcome. Salith felt a chill run through her. Far from the battlefield, within the depths of the Apex fleet, ancient minds processed the data. Patterns that had held true for thousands of cycles no longer fit. One factor appeared again and again. Human units, human resistance, human tactics. A signal echoed across the shared consciousness of the Apex. Threat level recalculated. Human presence confirmed. For the first time in generations, the Apex predators adjusted their plans not to conquer, but to avoid. And Princess Salith finally understood that the recruit she had dismissed was something far more dangerous than he appeared. Princess Salith stood in the observation corridor long after the alarms quieted. Smoke still drifted through damaged sections of the hangar. Emergency lights cast red and white shadows across scorched metal. Medics moved quickly among the wounded, their footsteps sharp against the deck. The Apex were gone, but they were not defeated. "They're regrouping," Admiral Corrin said behind her. His voice was low and tight. "They always do." Salith nodded slowly, though her thoughts were elsewhere. Her eyes remained fixed on the human unit below. The recruit in gray was giving instructions, calm and steady, as if they had just completed a training drill instead of surviving an Apex assault. "What is his name?" she asked. Corrin followed her gaze. "Which one?" "The one leading that unit," Salith said. "The recruit." The Admiral paused. "That's strange." Salith turned to him. "What is? He isn't supposed to be leading anyone." Corrin replied. He tapped a control, pulling up personnel data. His brow furrowed. "Official rank. Recruit first class. Assigned 3 weeks ago." "That is impossible," Salith said quietly. Corrin exhaled. "Yes, that's what concerns me." Hours later, The ship was locked down under heightened alert. The Apex fleet remained at distance, circling just outside immediate weapons range. It was as if they were watching. Waiting. Salith requested permission to visit the human sector. The request surprised many, but no one denied a royal observer. Escorted by 2 guards, she moved through corridors marked by battle scars. Melted plating. Blackened walls. The smell of burned air still lingered. Human soldiers filled the area. They worked without ceremony. Some cleaned weapons. Others repaired portable defenses. A few sat quietly, backs against the wall, eyes closed in brief rest. There was no celebration, no loud victory, only readiness. The recruit noticed her approach immediately. He straightened, then paused, as if deciding how to respond. In the end, he did not bow deeply or kneel. He placed a fist lightly against his chest in a simple gesture of respect. "Princess," he said. Salith studied him closely now. His face showed exhaustion, but his eyes were sharp, alert, far older than his official rank suggested. "You led that defense," she said. "I followed protocol," he replied calmly. "That was not standard protocol," Salith said. A faint smile touched his lips. "No, Your Highness. It was human protocol." She folded her hands behind her back. "What is your name?" "Elias Ward," he said. "Terran Defense Forces." A simple answer. No titles, no embellishment. "Why were the Apex withdrawn?" she asked. Elias did not answer immediately. He glanced toward his unit, making sure they were occupied, then returned his attention to her. "Because they recognized us," he said. Salith frowned. "They have never faced humans in open war." "No," Elias agreed. "But they've studied us." He tapped the side of his wrist device. "We've been running patterns, learning how they think. Apex don't fear strength alone. They fear unpredictability." Salith's crest lifted slightly. "And you showed them that?" "We reminded them," Elias said, "that humans don't fight the way predators expect prey to fight." Before Salith could respond, alarms flared again. Not attack alarms. Long-range detection alerts. "Princess," one of her guards said urgently, "you should return to the command deck." Salith turned back to Elias. "Will they attack again?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "But not the same way." Even. The command chamber buzzed with tension. The Apex fleet had not advanced, but something else had changed. "They're deploying signal structures," a sensor officer reported. "Long range. Wideband transmissions." "Communication?" Corin asked. "No known language matches," the officer replied. "But it's deliberate." Salith's eyes widened slightly. "They're not talking to us. They're talking about us," Corin said. A projection expanded, showing strange biological constructs drifting between Apex ships. They pulsed in rhythm, sending signals across the void. "Psychological pressure," another commander muttered. "They're trying to break morale." Salith felt a familiar unease, but it did not grow into fear. Instead, she found herself thinking of Elias Ward. "Bring the human unit leader to the chamber," she said. Corin looked at her sharply. "Your Highness?" "The Apex reacted to him," Salith said. "I want to understand why." Moments later, Elias entered the chamber. He walked past admirals and alien commanders without hesitation, stopping before the holo display. "You see it too," he said quietly. Corin raised an eyebrow. "See what?" "They're testing our response time," Elias replied, measuring hesitation, looking for fractures. Salith studied him. "And what do humans do when watched by predators?" Elias met her gaze. "We stare back." He reached out and adjusted the projection, highlighting Apex signal nodes. "Those structures are vulnerable," he said. "Not physically, mentally." Several commanders stiffened. "Explain." "Apex share a distributed awareness," Elias said. "When one senses danger, all feel it. That makes them powerful, but also fragile. Feed uncertainty into the system, and it spreads fast." "You want to scare them," Corin said. "No," Elias corrected. We want to confuse them. Salith felt a spark of excitement. How? Elias smiled faintly. By doing something no prey species ever does. The plan was risky. Human strike teams would not attack the Apex fleet directly. Instead, they would launch small, fast craft unarmed, lightly shielded, and fly straight through Apex patrol zones. Not firing, not fleeing, simply passing through. This is madness, one commander snapped. They'll be destroyed. Elias shook his head. No. They won't. Salith leaned forward. Because the Apex won't understand it. Exactly, Elias said. Predators expect resistance or escape. Calm passage sends the wrong signal. The operation began. Human craft launched in silent waves. Tiny shapes against the vastness of space. They did not accelerate aggressively. They did not hide. They flew like they had nothing to fear. Apex ships tracked them, weapons armed, then hesitated. Signals spiked across Apex channels. Confusion rippled through the biological network. Why would prey move closer without attack? Why show no fear? One human craft passed within meters of an Apex warship close enough to see living armor ripple. No shots were fired. The human ship continued on its path. Salith's breath caught. They're hesitating, an officer whispered. Across the display, Apex formations began to shift, not forward, but away. Defensive patterns emerged. Space opened where pressure had once built. The Apex were not retreating, but they were no longer advancing. Elias exhaled slowly. They're rethinking the hunt. Salith felt something deep inside her change. For the first time, she did not see humans as fragile allies. She saw them as something else. A species that had learned, through centuries of struggle, how to face monsters without becoming one. Far across the void, Apex command minds pulsed with unease. Old instincts failed. Ancient certainty cracked. The humans were not prey. They were a question. And questions, the Apex realized too late, were dangerous. The Apex did not leave. That alone unsettled the coalition. Hours passed after the human craft drifted calmly through Apex patrol zones. The strange signal structures continued to pulse, but their rhythm had changed. Slower, uneven, as if the ancient predators were thinking harder than they ever had before. Princess Salith stood beside the command table, watching the holo display. The red threat markers no longer pressed inward. Instead, they shifted back and forth, uncertain. They're confused, Admiral Corrin said quietly. Yes, Salith replied. And confused predators are the most dangerous. She glanced toward Elias Ward, who stood slightly apart from the admirals. He was silent, arms folded, eyes fixed on the display, as if he could see beyond it. What comes next? She asked him. Elias did not answer right away. They'll probe us again, he said finally. But not with scouts. Not with fleets. Then with what? Corrin asked. Elias's jaw tightened. With hunters. As if summoned by his words, alarms flared again. This time, the sound was different. Unknown contacts, a sensor officer shouted. Multiple signatures small, fast, high energy. They're bypassing normal space. Salith's crest rose in alarm. What are they? The officer swallowed. Apex champions. Silence fell over the chamber. Every species in the coalition knew the stories. Apex champions were not soldiers. They were living weapons, individual predators grown and trained for one purpose only, to kill what could not be broken by fleets. They don't deploy those lightly, Corrin said. If they've sent champions, it means they consider us a real threat now. Salith finished. The holo display shifted. New red markers appeared inside the coalition's defensive perimeter. They've already breached, an officer said. Multiple entry points. Internal. Elias straightened. Lock down civilian sectors, he ordered calmly. Seal off main corridors. Give them narrow paths. Corrin looked at him sharply. You're issuing commands. Recruit. Elias met his gaze without flinching. Do you want them contained? Or do you want them hunting freely? A pause. Follow his plan, Salith said. The order went out. The first Apex champion revealed itself in Corridor 12. It was larger than the scouts, taller than a human by twice their height. Its living armor was thicker, layered, covered in scars that told of countless battles. Its eyes glowed with a cold, focused intelligence. Coalition troops opened fire. The champion did not slow. Energy bolts struck its armor and dispersed uselessly. It moved with terrifying speed, claws slicing through barriers, bodies thrown aside like debris. Panic spread. Then the humans arrived. Not a full platoon, just one unit. Elias led them. They did not charge the champion. They retreated, drawing it deeper into the corridor. Human soldiers activated devices that altered gravity, forcing the massive predator to adjust its movements. It adapted quickly, too quickly. The champion lunged, catching one human midair and hurling her into the wall. She fell, unmoving. Something changed in Elias's expression. "Fall back," he ordered. Phase 2. The humans split apart, moving into positions that looked almost careless. The champion advanced, confident now. Then the floor beneath it collapsed, not into empty space but into a compressed gravity well. The champion slammed down, momentarily pinned. Human weapons fired not at its armor, but at the exposed joints, sensory nodes, and balance organs. The creature roared. It broke free, but it was wounded. For the first time, Apex blood hit the deck. The champion hesitated. That hesitation cost it everything. Elias stepped forward, raised a compact weapon, and fired a single, focused kinetic round directly into the creature's core. The champion convulsed once, then fell still. Silence followed. Human medics rushed to their fallen comrade. "She's alive," one of them said. "Barely." Elias closed his eyes for a moment. Then he stood. "Mark the body," he said. "We'll need it." Across the ship, similar battles erupted. 3 more Apex champions breached in different sectors. 2 were driven back into space through controlled decompression traps. 1 reached the command deck. Princess Salith watched as the massive creature tore through blast doors like thin paper. Guards fell back, firing desperately. She did not run. Elias stepped between her and the champion. "You shouldn't be here," she said sharply. He did not look back. "Someone has to make it focus." The champion studied him. Unlike the scouts, this creature did not rush. It circled slowly, eyes locked on Elias. It recognized him. "You," Salith whispered. "It knows you." The champion struck. Elias moved not away, but toward it. The two collided in a blur of motion. Elias was thrown hard against the wall, armor cracking. He slid to the floor, gasping. Salith's heart clenched. The champion raised a claw, and stopped. Its head tilted slightly, as if listening to something unheard. Elias coughed, then laughed weakly. "Too late," he said. The corridor filled with a deep, rising hum. From hidden ports, human devices activated simultaneously. Not weapons, transmitters. They broadcast a pattern complex, chaotic, impossible to predict. The champion staggered. Its shared awareness, once its greatest strength, now overwhelmed it. Conflicting signals flooded its mind. Instincts clashed. Certainty shattered. The creature screamed. Human soldiers emerged from concealed positions and fired in unison. The champion collapsed at Elias's feet. Salith stared. "You planned this," she said softly. Elias nodded. "They came to hunt us. So we let them feel what it's like." Far from the Radiant Accord, deep within the Apex fleet, something unprecedented occurred. The Apex command consciousness fractured. Data from the champions flooded back not victory reports, but confusion, fear, and loss. Individual death had always been acceptable, but uncertainty was not. The humans had not just killed champions, they had broken the hunt. Signals rippled through the fleet. Withdraw, regroup, reassess. For the first time in their long history, the Apex did not know how to win this war. In the aftermath, the ship was quiet again. Too quiet. Princess Salith stood in the medical bay, watching Elias lie unconscious on a recovery bed. His injuries were severe, but stable. "He'll live," a medic said. "Stubborn species." Salith allowed herself a small smile. She turned away, her thoughts heavy. Humans did not outmatch the Apex in size or strength. They outmatched them in something far more dangerous: adaptation. imagination, the willingness to step into the darkness and stare back. As she left the bay, a message arrived from long-range sensors. The Apex fleet was retreating, not fleeing, withdrawing. Princess Salith looked once more at the human soldiers moving through the corridors, already repairing, already preparing. She understood now. This war was no longer about survival. It was about redefining what it meant to be a predator. And the Apex had just learned a terrible truth. Humans were not prey. They were not predators either. They were something worse. They were challengers. The Apex fleet withdrew in silence. No victory cries echoed through the coalition ships. No celebrations filled the halls. The retreat felt unreal, like the sudden quiet after a storm that had threatened to tear everything apart. Princess Salith watched the red threat markers fade from the holo display. One by one, the massive organic warships turned away and slipped into deep space. The pressure that had weighed on her chest for days finally eased. "They're leaving," an officer said softly, almost afraid to believe it. Admiral Corrin nodded. "Confirmed. Full withdrawal. No pursuit." The room remained still. Everyone understood the truth. The Apex were not defeated in a traditional sense. They were not destroyed. They were something far more unsettling. They were convinced. Hours later, emergency status ended across the Radiant Accord. Damaged sections were sealed, then reopened. Crews moved from survival to repair. The ship lived again. Princess Salith walked alone through a quiet corridor toward the medical bay. She had delayed this moment long enough. Elias Ward lay unconscious when she arrived. Tubes and monitors surrounded him, soft lights reflecting off pale skin marked by bruises and burns. He looked smaller here, fragile, human, and yet, this single human had changed the course of a war that had terrified the galaxy for generations. A medic noticed her and bowed slightly. "He's stable, Your Highness. He'll wake soon." "Thank you," Salith said. She remained at his side after the medic left. For a long moment, she simply watched him breathe. "You were never just a recruit," she said quietly, knowing he could not hear her. "Were you?" "Wud." As if answering her, Elias stirred. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening as awareness returned. He noticed the medical lights, the hum of machines, and finally her. "Well," he said weakly, "this is embarrassing." Salith let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You nearly died," she said. "Occupational hazard," Elias replied. He tried to sit up and failed. "Guess I lost that argument." "You won the war," Salith said. Elias's expression grew serious. "No. We just changed it." News of the Apex withdrawal spread quickly through the coalition. Messages arrived from allied worlds in waves: relief, disbelief, hope. Entire civilizations that had lived under the shadow of the Apex for centuries struggled to understand what had happened. How did you force them back? Why didn't they finish the attack? What weapon did humanity use? Princess Salith addressed the council later that day. She stood before leaders of dozens of species, her voice calm and clear. "We did not defeat the Apex with superior force," she said. "We defeated their certainty." She gestured toward the human delegation seated behind her. Humans showed the Apex something they had never encountered before. A species that refuses to behave as prey. A species that adapts faster than fear. Murmurs filled the chamber. One elder leaned forward. "Are you saying the Apex can be challenged now?" Salith nodded. "I am saying they can no longer assume victory. Gram over Khan. I am saying they can no longer assume victory." That truth spread like fire. Across the galaxy, worlds long hidden began to speak openly again. Trade routes reopened. Defense pacts strengthened. The idea of resistance no longer felt like suicide, and always, at the center of the story, was humanity. Within the Apex domain, the retreat shook ancient foundations. The Apex command consciousness replayed the conflict endlessly. Every tactic, every anomaly, the humans did not fight like prey. They did not fight like predators. They fought like something else entirely. They observed. They learned. They changed. The Apex had hunted countless species into extinction, yet never once had a target forced them to adapt in return. That was unacceptable. For the first time in Apex history, a new directive spread through the shared mind. Avoid unnecessary contact with humans. It was not fear, but it was close. Weeks passed. Elias recovered slowly. Human physiology surprised coalition medics, as it often did. He returned to duty long before they expected. His uniform changed. No longer gray. When Princess Salith next saw him, he stood on a training deck, issuing instructions to mixed species units. His presence commanded attention without effort. "You promoted him," she said later to Admiral Corrin. Corrin gave a rare smile. "Field commission. Captain Ward, long overdue." Salith nodded. "He earned it." She approached Elias after the session ended. "Captain," she said. He turned and smiled faintly. "Princess, you could have taken command," she said. "You could have demanded recognition sooner." Elias shrugged. "Rank doesn't stop Apex clause." She studied him. "Why stay a recruit then?" He thought for a moment. "Predators ignore recruits. Makes it easier to watch them." "Predators ignore recruits' formants." Salith let out a soft laugh. "You are dangerous. Only when necessary," Elias replied. A formal ceremony was held before the coalition fleet departed. Princess Salith stood beside Elias as honors were announced. Medals were given. Names were recorded into history. When it was Elias's turn, the chamber grew quiet. "For exceptional leadership under impossible conditions," the herald announced. "For altering the course of galactic conflict, Captain Elias Ward of Earth is recognized by unified decree." Salith stepped forward. Instead of placing a medal, she removed a small crystalline insignia from her mantle, royal, ancient, and symbolic beyond measure. "With this," she said, "the Valari crown names humanity a protector species." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Protector species were rare, trusted, respected, called upon when the impossible needed to be faced. Elias looked genuinely stunned. "I don't," he began. Salith met his eyes. "You already are." She placed the insignia into his hand. As the fleet prepared to depart, Salith stood at the viewport once more, stars stretching endlessly beyond. Elias joined her. "Will they come back?" she asked. "Yes," he said honestly. "Someday." "And when they do?" Elias smiled, not with confidence, but with certainty. "Then we'll adapt again, far away, in the dark spaces where Apex ships retreated." Ancient predators remembered something they had never needed before: caution. They would hunt again, but never carelessly. Because somewhere in the vast, dangerous galaxy, there was a species that refused to accept its place in the food chain. And that terrified even the apex predators. The war was not over. But for the first time, humanity stood not at the edge of extinction, but at the beginning of legend,